Well, this was a very stock standard reshuffle by any stretch of the imagination. Scott Morrison did a reshuffle at the end of last year. Anthony Albanese's done his this year. In relation to my position on climate change, Mark Butler, having held the role for the best part of 8 years, himself reached a view that it was time for a new challenge for him. And we had some very mutually respectful conversations between Mark, Anthony and I about a change of roles, and I was more than happy to take this role on. Now, in relation to climate change, our commitment is very clear. We are committed to bringing Australia in line with the other 120 countries around the world committed to net zero emissions by 2050. Under Scott Morrison's leadership, Australia is an outlier, a laggard. We will have a strong, evidence-based, scientifically focused and economically focused climate change policy at the next election, which I'm very much looking forward to developing with the team.
You say you're very clear. Let's be clear then. What is the midterm target, 2030 or 2035?
Well, let's just talk about that for a minute. Our commitment to net zero by 2050 is very, very clear. And of course, I'll be consulting about the pathway to that target. We need to meet the target, but targets are easier set than met. And we'll be developing the policies to get there, as opposed to the government, which has said we'll get back to you after the election about our 2035 target. They're treating the Australian people with contempt and won't outline the pathway towards zero. They won't get there by 2050. It was revealed during the week they don't have any modelling as to how they'll get there, no timetable to get there. I'll take a very different approach because I believe getting climate change and energy policy right is the key, one of the very key areas to restoring traditional industries, to getting investment in manufacturing right across the board, to getting jobs going. And if we get it wrong, hundreds of thousands of jobs will be destroyed under current policy settings. But if we get it right, we can unleash investment, not only in energy generation, but in the industries and sectors which so very much rely on it.
Anthony Albanese says he's not going to lead a party that's not committed to climate change action. Do you see this as a priority then for yourself, to give clarity on what that midterm target is? Otherwise, it's very far off into the never-never. We're talking 2050. You need a bit more clarity in the foreseeable future, don't you?
Well, of course, we need to and will outline our pathway to net zero by 2050. But targets are just part of that conversation, Kieran. And I mean, I think it's easy to get caught up in the, targets good or bad conversation. You need to consider the policy levers, the mechanisms, a whole range of things need to go behind that. And that's the work that I've already started and will continue to do. I've been in the job a couple of days. You'd understand I've got a lot more consultation to do about that. But we will have, as I've said, consistently since Thursday, a very strong climate change policy, one based on a sensible understanding of the science and one focused on the economic opportunities of getting this right.
Joel Fitzgibbon says you should just adopt the government's target for 2030. Wouldn't that make the politics easier?
Well, I take a different view for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think if you are going to get net zero by 2050, you have to outline a very clear plan to get there. And the government's not doing that. They don't believe in net zero by 2050 and they have no plan to get there. That's the first point. We need to have our policy based on the science and the evidence. In relation to the politics, look, let's just be frank. Labor's been elected from opposition to government 3 times since World War II. It's a hard thing to do. And when we've done it before, we've given people a compelling reason to vote Labor. A simple policy agenda, but a compelling one. Now, a compelling reason to vote Labor is not, hey, vote for us because we're the same as the other guys, but we're a bit nicer. That's not a compelling reason to vote Labor. The Australian people, I think, want an alternative, not an echo. They want a remedy, not a replica. And under Anthony's leadership, that's exactly what we'll provide.
You suffered a 7% swing there in your home seat, the safe Western Sydney seat that you hold. In your Jack Ferguson lecture, memorial lecture late last year, you made a pitch for Labor to be targeting aspirational Australians in the suburbs where I grew up. Does that include a strong response on climate change? I mean, how serious do your voters take this issue? Is it a big concern for them?
Of course it does, Kieran. And you and I did grow up not far from each other here. Me in Smithfield, you're in Guildford around the corner. But you understand that the suburbs are complicated places. And the speech I made last year was about trying to get a bigger focus on some of the issues facing the suburbs. I understand the focus on the politics, but I was talking about some of the great policy challenges in the suburbs, including casualisation, for example, which Tony Burke's been doing great work on and which we'll hear more about. But of course people in the suburbs are concerned about climate change, but they want to see the policy settings right. And just over my shoulder, Kieran, is the biggest industrial estate in the Southern Hemisphere, the Smithfield Wetherill Park Industrial Estate. We live this every day. We live the ramifications of getting the climate and energy policy wrong. We live the drift of 8 years of Liberal government with 22 energy policies and the lack of certainty, the lack of private sector investment in energy, the lack of commitment to replacing the energy sources that need to be replaced as they reach the end of their natural life, and all the uncertainty that creates for investment in manufacturing. I believe we can and will be a country which makes things. But the key, the first step, is to get energy policy and climate policy right. Now, that's not avoiding a climate change policy. It's recognising that getting it right is the key. The Australian people, I think, understand that, and that's what Labor has done best for generations, managing economic transition. That's what Hawke and Keating did when they managed the transition in our economy as our national income was declining. But they invested in people and they invested in industries. They ensured the policy certainty.
A couple of quick ones to wrap up. Is this a chance for you to reboot your own political trajectory if you can navigate this policy for Labor, given the last election, the policies which you were an architect of in large part were rejected by the people, by voters?
I see this as a great policy challenge, and that's what I got into politics to do, is to reform and to be involved in the discussions which are important to our country, the levers on the economic change for our country. That's the way I see the job. I'll leave you commentators to do the rest, Kieran. I'm focused on the job that Anthony's given me, which is to give the Labor Party a strong climate policy, one which wins the economic argument, to destroy the fallacy, the Liberal National Party fallacy that somehow action on climate change is bad for jobs, when in fact the opposite is true.
And finally, was it smart for Anthony Albanese to poke some of his rivals in the eye with Tanya Plibersek and Jim Chalmers losing some responsibilities in the reshuffle?
I don't accept the premise of your question. As I said at the outset, reshuffles happen. They're a regular part of Australian political life. Certainly from my point of view, I had very constructive, mutually respectful conversations with Albo about the options in relation to myself. I, for one, made it clear to him, while I was happy to continue in health, I was also happy to take on a new challenge if that's what he preferred for the sake of the team, the good of the team. Mark and I had discussed it, and he had indicated to me he thought he was ready for a new challenge. So the reshuffle, from my point of view, was handled professionally with respect that you would expect from a leader of Anthony's calibre.